So this video is going to be a little bit about Booleans and curvature once again. However, we're going to start this out by setting up an example. So we're just going to send this cube off to the great pasture of where cubes just go when you delete them. Don't worry, it'll be safe. And so we'll Shift A and we'll add a plane. And I'll have my modifier panel open so that way you're kind of aware of what's going on. And we're just going to go into edit mode, right click, and subdivide to add one subdivision. And we're going to grab the center point and press not Control G, but I believe Control H, and we're going to choose hook to new object, and now we have this empty, and so now we can raise this empty as we want. So I'm just going to jump to frame 20, even though my screen cap's sitting on top of it, and we're just going to choose location, and then we're going to jump to frame 80, and we're going to press I, and we're going to set the location here. And this may be a little crazy, wondering what I'm doing, but that's the animation in action. And we'll just lower our frames. And so we'll go back to frame 1 where we have this, and we'll press Alt V and turn on wireframe. And I'm going to press Control 1, add a subdivision, except we want to go in edit mode and select our boundary loops. So select boundary loops, and we'll just press Q and mark that. In my mark settings, I have crease on, which is the one that I'm acting on here. And so now if we watch it, it'll do something like this. So this is just kind of the start of our example, but I just wanted to create something that we could talk about. So at this point, things are looking good. We want to go back to frame 20, and let's actually take our viewport down to 0, and we'll just press I, and then as we get to our zenith, we'll raise this up to 4 and press I, and we'll turn off optimal display. And so if we just let this play, we just have sub D levels being added as it gets more curvy. And so I'm going to put a decimate mod on it to clean it up at the end. So basically at the beginning, it will look like a generic quad, and then it will grow into being a more developed shape. I'm also going to turn off relationship lines because I don't like to see the dotted line for this. When we take a look at this, this is what we have. And so, you know, you start out with something plainer and it starts to get simple, but as you get curvature involved, it of course gets more complex. And so the purpose of this example was to just kind of show how geometry gets more complex as curvature is involved, you know, depending on your level of smoothing that you're going for, or close up, whatnot. But for the most part, because of that additional geometry that comes with curvature, Booleans have to be approached differently. And with my topo study, the goal was to show how destructively you can solve these things pretty creatively by just getting in there and just basically rewriting the topology and helping it along. And so this video is a little bit of the same. So for starters, I'm just going to press Q and Control click power save, so we can just name this Bool demo. I mean, I never save files, but because of power save, it just makes it easier, unless it doesn't save it, which I'm pretty sure it didn't save it this time because the timeline was playing. I'll have to check into that after this video. So let's discuss starting out with something like this. So right here, the geometry is pretty simple. I'm going to Shift D, Control A, visual geometry to mesh. We're just going to move this over to the side, and we're going to extrude it down a couple of units, and let's just create a circular. So I'm in Boxcutter, my snapping is on, so I can jump off this face center, and it looks like our normals were flipped. So it's always important to make sure your normals aren't flipped when you're just doing random extrusions for depth, because there's just no way to tell now if your normals are flipped inside out until your shape is being drawn incorrectly. But after creating our shape, this is kind of our starting point. And if we look at this, Blender solves it as Blender would solve it, right? With the most minimal of geometry. And this isn't the worst thing, but it isn't the best thing either. So if I were to press Q and just click bevel to add a bevel, we can see that because of the way it solved it, these lines got a little bit skewed, which isn't the worst. I mean, if we turn off visibility, we could see that, you know, it's not the end of the world, but if we get bigger, we see that that turns into artifacting. And so for that reason, I've always recommended that using edges to help solve these sort of situations are the best ways to avoid such issues and actually get that level of control that you desire and that smooth result. So these rules have been ingrained into me from, you know, like 100,000 hours of Boolean working, but it is something I do try to convey in videos. So let's continue on. Let's actually take this to the max, which is here, and we're just going to Shift A or Shift D, duplicate, right click, Control A, visual geometry to mesh, and we're just going to move this over. And you know, we're just going to select everything, select boundary loop, and we have to look at it to the point where we see some grid in order to get this to fit. You can't just snap willy-nilly. So now we have our shape, and we'll hit it with a sharpen just because. And with this shape, we actually need its bool shape. So I'm just going to bring up bool scroll real quick, and we'll duplicate this, but right click and cancel so there's a duplicate. If we move the original, we'll mess up what we have here. And I'm going to shift click this one, which means that if I go under mesh tools and I choose reset axis, I'm able to reset the axis on both the X and the Y of the secondary object, basically placing this exactly where I need it. So, you know, reset axis is there for you when you need it. And so now we have this shape, we have this curvature, and because of this, our situation's a little bit more complicated. And what I mean by that is once we cut in, everything's so far so good, but we can't go too deep. You think you want to go deep, but it appears that we have to start modifying the shape to be something more like that, and then we could actually go deeper. No innuendo intended there. But let's say we actually wanted to add the bevel on it, right? Because everybody comes to Blender and hardops for the bevel because I make it look so easy, when in actuality it is so very hard. But it actually isn't that hard. It's actually getting better all the time. I love the work that Howard's putting into it. Our goal of bevel awareness, love every moment. So we're just going to put a bevel on this, and we see that the old overlap's happening, but it's happening everywhere. Like there's so many quadrants just being destroyed. And as I look at it, I see, you know, I could probably get in here and slide these near misses like burnout, do a little drift action, you get real clean. But instead, we're just going to go under modifier and we're just going to add a weld. And I'm just going to roll the wheel until it eats that area. And then I'll hold shift and move it up one. And we can just start dialing it back until we get something satisfactory. So this is one of those rare moments where weld works out for you. But weld doesn't always work out for you. And for me to just leave it at this and say, hey guys, weld's going to work out for you. It's a damn lie. I can't lie to you. So let's actually remove the weld on this duplicate, and we'll Control A, or I guess what we need to do is bring this up with the bool shape as well, then Shift D it over next door, because I don't want to mess things up. I just need to show y'all that in the event that weld didn't work and you had to manually solve this, this is how I would go about solving such an area. Of course, this thing is a easily mirrorable quadrant situation. So, I mean, I always default to an easy mirror when I see the opportunity. I apologize for that. But let's just tap into edit mode, and this is, I'm just gonna put my cursor here, and we see that this geometry needs like a little intervention. And if we look at this, we see that this geometry needs a little bit of an intervention. And we could do the same thing on the other side, but I'll just save you all that by pressing Alt X, and we'll just use a mod and apply just to mirror that to the other side. So this is actually a universe where things worked out for us, which is strange. So let's duplicate it over, because I'm still looking for this troublesome situation to show you guys. And it hasn't yet come up because, yeah, I don't know, I've solved too many Booleans. It's hard for me to even put myself in the shoes of someone struggling with Boolean. You know, the weld on this thing is out of control. But let's choose to actually deal with this another way. Let's say that, you know, there's a way to make this annoying. Let's make it bigger. There we go. Now this thing's eating our lunch. And so let's try our weld trick, right? We used weld a second ago. It was pretty good. You know, you move the mouse when you're in the modal, it adjusts the weld, and then you just shift scroll to move it up one. And then that's where I start evaluating it. And we see that weld isn't going to be our buddy today. That's fine. We're just going to apply to Boolean, and we're just going to get in and evaluate what we have going on in every area that's showing problems. So right here, we see that to get the curvature, this area became incredibly skewed. I mean, these are things I'm thinking about all the time. I'm like, how are we going to solve this? This is like the final solve, right? Like, I mean, Hops is aimed to solve like a million issues that come up with modeling, but I consider this one, at the end of the day, a certain quality of mesh is required, and I know that in order to, end the Hops tail properly, we have to solve such things. So we're just getting in here and just solving, just rewriting using J. Keep in mind that, you'll never press G. You'll press GG, GG on that Geo, bro, But we're just getting in here, just slide things around, just doing a little bit of cleanup. A little bit of cleanup can go a long way towards helping you get like a manageable result. And so sometimes I personally enjoy getting in here and just seeing what we've been given by Blender itself. I see sometimes these solutions change over time and the results we get change over time. And, because of that, sometimes things that worked in older blend files don't work in newer ones. And there's absolutely no reason for me to do a circular solve on this because I could just mirror this, believe me, but we're just talking. But over time, I've seen the solutions with Booleans get better and better. I mean, when we first started hardops, the carve was a thing, and whenever they removed it, we made a big fuss. I mean, not too big a fuss, not like we're gonna say anything to anyone, but we're just like, well, they removed it. I love that thing, but in retrospect, carve was terrible. I mean, it did the job, but it showed that you can destroy a lot of geometry to get a point across. And if you think we're solving a lot nowadays, we're not as much as we used to. The art of the solve used to be, be the name of my book, but Blender solved it. And now I feel that it gets even easier. I mean, every time I go through this little exercise, I feel like I understand just a little bit more about the geometry. Let's say I just gave up and just, actually, no. Like Naruto and his terrible box art for the 35th anniversary edition, we can't give up, and you better believe it. So, solving is just a matter of you getting in here, looking for these near misses, and just determining that they're irrelevant. So these three can just be merged, which actually relieves the tension in this area. And you can see the bevel actually improving in the superimposed view as I'm doing this, which is part of why I enjoy doing this. I mean, I'm a lunatic, so I understand. And I don't expect you, the viewer, to also want to be getting in here solving geometry. But whenever it comes to curvature, there's a different game that's played. And I feel that, a degree of education is important for helping users be aware of those differences and how they can best make their way with Blender. Because, Blender looks great and all on the outside, and it's just as great on the inside. But, I see more and more that people sometimes are bypassing some of the fundamentals of Blender to just jump straight into using plugins, which, I mean, I'm not completely against, but it maybe isn't the best path. I mean, learning why Blender is the way it is and why we made some of the choices, I feel, probably gives you a little bit of a better groundwork to understand our tool and where we're coming from with it, instead of just a bunch of weirdness. Because, to me, at the end of the day, hardops basically started because object has shade smooth here, but normals was here, and it just made for this really weird workflow. And so, it seemed that putting that together would help things. And turned out that having a floating modifier super ship when you press Control tilde is probably the ultimate way to help workflow along. So, I always tell the team our best ideas are yet to come. Everything we do now is just kind of a study, like one day I hope that, we solve that final puzzle and Blender just allows us to cut any shape we want without any fear of retribution. But just like human transmutation, you're probably going to turn your daughter into a chimera. So, be prepared to pay the cost. So anyways, we've solved this using 3 different examples. Actually, this example is terrible. We just let our hole just get destroyed. And how can we avoid that? How can we avoid that? We can't put a vertex group on it because it's still going to eat it. So we just have to lower it until it comes back. There we go, we're back. We can't just let Weld just eat our circle. You know, I extruded that for a reason, but hopefully this video, while I try to keep it short, can just kind of give an explanation of how Booleans interact with various types of surfaces. Of course, it goes without saying that there are ways to get around these things, and this is just my personal preference and viewpoints on how Blender is. So, you know, by no means am I saying, you know, I'm absolutely right, this is the way you should do things. But if you're looking at geometry anywhere like I am, this is kind of how I see things. Of course, when Mesh Machine updates, I look forward to showing exactly how far you can go with normal transfer and things like that. But I feel like the version that I'm using is definitely different than the version that you guys are using, and I just don't want to get into that. So I do have content planned for that. But for now, we got to talk about the vanilla fundamentals and how that affects you with geometry. So with that, I'll wrap up this video and I'll see you guys next time. So I figured I would make this the month of Kitops. So it goes without saying that I should at least talk about how you would just keep this insert, right? So I'm just going to go into mod scroll. Of course, I'm going to save this scene because I don't want any nonsense to happen to it, even though I'm pretty trusting of what Kitops has become. And we're going to go to our folder that we've been using for the demos, and we'll choose to create insert. And just like that, we're already in the scene looking at our insert. And so the first thing I'm going to do is save the insert, and we'll just call this, I believe I'm already working on circulars. So circular 1, we'll just click the little plus. Circular 2 appears to exist. Circular 3 it is. Circular 3. And so just like that, we have it saved. I'm going to delete that extra mesh because I don't know what's going on there. But we'll just go ahead and add a bevel to this because we're embellishing for the thumbnail, something I enjoy doing. And we'll look at this in render mode, and there's a very nice render scene going on. I'm quite proud of Chip for all his work. However, we're just going to go ahead and delete the lights, and then under HDR we will change this to be removed. Maybe actually let's change this to be removed so there's nothing. We'll press Alt V and then B, and we'll just roll the blank light until we get something we like. This was something I was planning on doing a video about today, was making the render scene yours, but I'll do that at a later time. But now that we have this scene set up, we can just render our thumbnail, and we're just embellishing for the image. It doesn't matter anything at this point because we're not going to save it, and then we can close the scene. So here we are back in our regular scene, and so I have my regular cube, and we'll go to basically circular 3 that has basically the sexiest thumbnail yet. Light setup not saved, so we'll never see this set up again. And just to save time, I'm going to shift click sharpen and just roll down auto smooth to 15 degrees, and that way I just know that whenever I start tagging this thing with circles, everything looks good. So we're looking at this at the end, and you see how Blender's solving with the Booleans. Just, I don't know, I call it nearest netted, nearest vertex, you know. It just grabs the nearest vertex, unless there's already an edge in its path, and then you see that, I'll just forget about that one. And you see if there's an edge in its path, there won't be any solve done for it. But the moment that we move this into basically open territory, that happens. So a lot of times I'll see people, you know, immediately start cutting in the middle of a face, and I'm in my head, I already see these solves happening. It just makes me chuckle to myself. So what I'll do is Control N and make a new file. And because of this type of insert, not that insert, circular 3, this one is kind of good for spheres. So we'll just press Q, and under mesh tools, we'll just choose sphere cast, maybe hit it with a Control 4, and then we'll give it an auto smooth, or actually smooth at this point, but we will give it an auto smooth and set this to like 15. You know, whenever you're taking in these advanced wedges, you really want to have a lower auto smooth, but really depending on your angle, it'll work against you. So now we're able to just slap these puppies on a sphere like nobody's business. And that's really all there is to it. So some inserts are actually better for spherical objects, while some of them will require a degree of finesse and planning, of course, because we don't dice and deform inserts on their way in. I mean, that's crazy. that's on my queue of things to do though, is dice and deform things on the way in. But for now, I just wanted to at least talk about how inserts react with spherical objects as well as planar, and some of the ways that you can go about solving when it comes to making them play nice with a Boolean. And we see that for the most part, this thing looks good. And spheres with Booleans are one of my favorite examples, because if we just press Control Numpad 0, right, select the object first, Control Numpad 0, we see it's a cube. Press Control 1, it's a very simple sphere. We press Control 3, Control 2, and it's getting a little bit better, but you know, we still see facets on the surface. And even if we set it to smooth, which we actually have to raise the auto smooth for this, so we'll just jump it up to 30. We see what we're looking at here. So a degree of faceting can happen within an difference between the amount of segments in your Boolean and the amount of geo in your mesh. This is something I talked about in the past, referring to the knife being thicker than the bread. So that's something that you definitely want to avoid, are these situations where the geometry is so simple it actually can't support it. Of course, we could transfer to normals, hack our way through, call it a day. But if we jump this up to level 4, we see that the geometry is a little more capable for what we're trying to cut into it. And if we turn off the visualization, everything looks so far so good. However, this little imperfection is something that wouldn't really work in a close-up. Neither would it right here. These are things that would probably be problematic. But notice that if we jump the level up again, we're able to actually mitigate these shading issues, because now our bread has enough to it that it's able to take what we're knifing into it. However, if we come out of this, we see that it's quite a degree thicker. But when it comes to Booleans and curvature, these are things that you have to keep in mind. And then don't even get me started again on what happens when you get a bevel involved. But with that, we'll wrap up this video, and I thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Alright, let's say I didn't end this video. Let's say I just kept going one more time about Boolean and freaking curvature. So I'm just going to delete this cube. Off to the pasture you go, bro. So, Kitops, and I have this KO export, which is like the inserts I made over the course of working on Kitops 2, just like a bunch of tests of ideas that I plan to show y'all how to make inserts of as we go along. But this one is a favorite that I made earlier. I posted on Twitter, and I just want to talk about how we would get something like this to actually cut into a cylinder. I'm actually choosing a cylinder instead of a sphere, because a sphere would require 2 curves for this, and I just don't have time to figure that out in the middle of a video. Curves are enough of a pain as it is when it's deforming, just one, and then when you put 2 in the mix, please kill me. So anyways, we will just sharpen this, just getting it to look good, and then we'll hit it with a level of subdivision, nothing brutal. And then we'll add a Bezier circle, and with this, we'll select this shape, select our circle, and we'll press Control P and just curve deform. And y'all might remember this from when I was talking about Boolean and curvature. We'll press Control A and apply to location. That didn't work out, so we'll just bring it out, and that actually puts us where we want to be. I mean, it looks terrible, but believe me, it could be worse. So this is where dice and hardops comes in, and I'm just going to dice it. However, currently dice doesn't actually show up in the location that the object is when it's being deformed in space. It'll show up in the middle, and currently dice isn't digital, meaning that the shader isn't powering it. So that means I have to go in wire mode here, and we'll just change the algorithm from knife project to maybe mesh intersect. And now after dicing it, we have a more desirable result. However, it looks like our shape is pointing the wrong direction. So I'm going to select the curve, and in edit mode, press Control T, 90, and then maybe Control R to not have to press all that again. And we'll just scale this in until it's beginning to penetrate the shape. And with this selected and this, we can press Q and go to difference, and this shape has been set up. So to get the shading to look right, I'll shift click sharpen, and we'll just roll down to sharpen until it's something acceptable, and we'll just bring this down to the bottom so it'll look as maybe it was intended. So this is what we're looking at this moment. We see that the shape is just being massacred because our knife is so dense and our bread so weak. So maybe not 1, maybe not 2, maybe not 3. And this is something a little more appropriate. So to close this video, I'll at least show y'all how I would take something like this and then shift click roll it up the stack in order to basically array this multiple times. And we could just close the video by just making something like that. And that's kind of my approach when it comes to deforming inserts at this time. So with that, hopefully that gave you some insights to Booleans and curvature. When it comes to, Booleans and Blender, it still is a battle that we're fighting everyone on different fronts in different ways. And I hope to come forward in the future with additional solutions and other ways that we could possibly mitigate or solve these issues. So with that, I'll finally wrap up this video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.